In this video, we'll discuss the evolution of the gaming industry and the competition among companies like Nintendo, Xbox, and Sony and what they've brought to us. A new generation, a magical term that opens up a new horizon, allowing us to see things that seemed impossible. It showcases tremendous progress, transitioning us from the era of simple pixels and basic colors to seeing facial features in high definition and superior color diversity with a seamless shift between two-dimensional and three-dimensional realms, creatively blending them together, much like what we witnessed in the game Mario 64. And how capabilities were maximized even with the device's low specifications, as programmers and designers managed to extract the maximum potential of the hardware to deliver amazing gaming experiences despite technical limitations. From generation to generation, we observe noticeable advancements. However, recently, the evolution and the boundaries between console devices and PCs have been diminishing at an alarming rate, to the point where we can hardly tell the difference between them. For instance, if we take current generation games and compare them to the graphical level on a PC, you'll notice that the differences are very minimal. Some people even say that the difference between the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 isn't significant, as this somewhat proves that graphical improvements diminish as we move to a new generation. If you want to see the difference, you have to go back 2 generations. Compare the 8th generation with the 7th. There's a significant difference. Compare the 7th generation with the 5th. There's a noticeable gap. The further we advance in the era of graphical evolution, the less significant the improvements become. Many of the features we see as new advancements are actually peripheral things like enhanced lighting details or physical grass. You'll notice that progress has shifted towards these peripheral aspects. There has always been fierce competition among gaming companies to develop consoles with very similar specifications. PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, PlayStation 1, and GameCube competed against each other. The console that defines each generation is the one that brings about changes or offers better games. In its early days, Nintendo dominated the market not by chance, but because of its superiority in game development. It set specific standards for itself. Thanks to the dedication of developers, we witnessed the release of fantastic and iconic games such as Castlevania, Mega Man, and Final Fantasy on the Super Famicom. Driven by necessity, developers came up with creative solutions during the development process. Nintendo was not just a platform for publishing games, it was also a developer of its own titles. Nintendo released iconic games that are still considered some of the most famous in the video game world today, such as The Legend of Zelda, Mario, Donkey Kong, and Metroid. Over time, Nintendo dominated the generation and monopolized the industry. However, a peculiar pattern in history shows that those who monopolize the industry often face disastrous consequences. Indeed, with the transition to the 4th generation, Nintendo's arrogance led them to refuse to listen to developers, insisting on cartridges over CDs. This simple loophole was the opportunity Sony exploited to successfully enter the market. Sony listened to the players and introduced new technologies, making a smooth transition to 3D. They provided almost everything developers wanted, and for the players, they offered something amazing, which is
$2.99.
And so, developers moved from Nintendo to PlayStation. We are talking about the most famous game, Final Fantasy, which came on 3 discs. Imagine the developers had such grand plans that they needed 3 discs, which was a big deal at the time. All these factors made PlayStation dominate the market. Sony dominated the market for 2 generations without any real competition. Even with Microsoft's entry, it didn't affect Sony in any way. If we look at the history of gaming consoles, we see that the most powerful device is not always the best-selling one. Instead, the console that serves players, offers the largest number of games, and makes development easier is the one that wins the generation. Now let's understand why Nintendo excelled in sales due to applying new generation standards. Yes, Nintendo, which presented the weakest console in the previous generation. Despite the console's weakness, they managed to overcome the intellectual limitations of some developers and players. How can a weak console achieve such high sales? The answer is very simple. Consistently high-quality games with a solid reputation, providing a steady annual release of games that players can enjoy. It's impressive that the reason for the delay of the Nintendo Switch 2 is that the company doesn't want to launch the console without a substantial lineup of games. This shows great respect for the players, and it's something that big companies like Sony and Xbox should inherently do. Don't think that a weak console didn't bring a revolution to the world of video games. A game like The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom left game developers puzzled about how Japanese developers managed to achieve seemingly miraculous feats. Therefore, the strength of the console is not the primary factor. The games are.